And now, to address the legal concerns of the community, Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. Thank you once again for joining our show, Legal Issues of Today. We have some exciting things to talk about today. I have my superstar panel with me today, also Attorney Milton from LA and Attorney Vanita from Chicago. Outstanding lawyers in their own rights. And but today we start off with history. That's right. We're going to talk about history today, just a little bit. That is that this week on Wednesday, we celebrated Juneteenth. And now we have politicians all over the globe attempting to rewrite history. They had a baseball game in Alabama recently, and it brought home the significance as to why we celebrate this holiday. First, Abraham Lincoln, in the midst of the Civil War, on January 1st, 1863, issued the final Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved people in the federal states of America were freed. All slaves were freed. Well, what happened though, the war didn't end until April 9th, 1865, when General Robert E. Lee finally surrendered. But the problem that existed is that we did not have iPhones, we didn't have the communication network, TVs and things that we have today. And so there was over 250,000 slaves in Texas that were still in slavery that was unaware of the proclamation, or they didn't know that the Civil War had ended, according to historians. In any event, the Union soldiers, as they marched down in Texas, they gave the information and the slaves were freed. And that's how June the 19th became Juneteenth. And the problem, though, that existed is when the slaves were freed, they really weren't free. They had no land, no money, no jobs, no identifiable method to make a living. And that was the history of our country. As the slaves started progressing, then we had to pass the Black Codes. And so even though freedom on paper said they were free, over the next almost century, we saw the African Americans in our country subjected to blatant discrimination, Jim Crow laws, segregation, lynching, and the works. And so we had that famous baseball. We had one of the most famous baseball players of all time, Willie Mays, celebrated this week. And unfortunately, he passed, one of the legends in our society. And they had this baseball game. And I hope everybody watched the interview with Reggie Jackson. Reggie Jackson talked about the effect of segregation in the South. As a professional athlete, when their team went to certain cities, he was not allowed to eat in restaurants, stay in a hotel. And he was very thankful that at the time he had white coach or general manager that wouldn't tolerate that. So the players would not stay in hotels, eat in restaurant where Reggie Jackson could eat. And we're not talking about 100 years ago. We're talking about in the 60s. And so the net result is that we celebrate Juneteenth, but it should be a day of reflection for all African Americans to know that why we're where we are today. Because of the segregation and because of these economic suppression of African America, we still have statistical evidence to show that we're way behind economically. But there's a history of that. And that's why on Juneteenth, everyone should take a moment to review the history. Because if you don't know the history, then it could always repeat itself. And I watch on TV in horror today of some of the conservative, some of the new movement in this current election. They're trying to revert back to old history. And that makes me very nervous. And that's where we start today. Council, what do you guys do to celebrate Juneteenth this week? Attorney Banks?
Good morning, Attorney Lee, Attorney Grimes. I reflected on the significance of Juneteenth and the history, Attorney Lee, that you just so eloquently summarized. And I thought about Opal Lee, a former teacher and activist, and she's known as the grandmother of Juneteenth. And she was one of those leaders who, through her activism, walking over 1,400 miles, 2.5 miles a day, from her home to Washington, D.C., as she was advocating for a federal holiday. And of course, on June 17th, 2021, President Biden signed Senate Bill 475, making Juneteenth the 11th federal holiday. And she, Opal Lee, who recently this year was also awarded the Presidential Medal of Honor, she was one of the foremost leaders of the movement to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. And so I reflected on her. I reflected on our ancestors who held the first watch nights so many years ago, awaiting the pronouncement of the Emancipation Proclamation, which was to be effective in 1863. But it was not until 2 years later, on June 19th, 1865, that Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas, to announce that all enslaved people were free.
Yeah, I wish I'd known you were going to ask this question, Nate. I would have brought along this article I read about this Black woman, excuse me, that out here in California, who was born a slave and became a very, very wealthy individual, and would not back off of going to court and fighting for what she felt she was entitled to. But so that was a very interesting article about her. And I just can't remember her name. Vanita, you probably know her. But anyway, man, I thought about, why is it still so many Black people, especially Black men, in prison today compared to the white population and the other populations here? And why are we still fighting for civil rights? And why is there so much inequality still in our society and police abuse towards Black people? So freedom is relative. You know, they had to have special laws created to keep us in a semi-enslaved state. We ain't free yet. Not totally free.
What I think is important, the biggest factor I think that slavery and discrimination has had on African American, our country, other than the fact that it resulted in some brutal assassination, murder, and things like that, but it was a significant economic cost to African Americans. African American wealth today is still only a fraction of the majority of the population. I read an article that in the last 4 years, the median wealth of African America has increased substantially, but the difference in the average African American wealth versus Caucasian is still a couple $100,000 in terms of net worth. And the reason being, we see so many barriers that are still present in our community. For example, some of the basic things that we need, like such as car insurance. If you live in certain zip codes, you pay more money for car insurance. Yep. Maybe most people don't realize that it's substantially higher. Now, why is that important? That's important because African American, because their insurance is so high, they get less coverage. So if they have an accident or injury, their recovery is substantially less because there's never enough insurance coverage. And now in our city, a good example is that because we've had this heat wave, there's more people out walking, I guess, or traveling on bicycles and things. And so we see a proliferation of people getting run over by cars. It just, everywhere you see, somebody get run over all over the country. Well, the problem is that in our neighborhood, person get run over and injured, there's not enough coverage. So we see these type of things still occurring right before our eyes, and we wonder why there's such a disparity. Or in Linden, for example, it's much more difficult for African Americans today to get loans because zip code factors. I watch some of the historians talk about the fact that you have these same-day cash services in certain community. So these basic services that are available to majority of Americans are not available in our community. Access to capital, loans, and things like that. So when we're talking about Juneteenth, we have to look at the progress we made and what we must do to continue to make progress for the future. And I watched this morning in Harlem on MSNBC, the president of the Heritage Foundation was on TV. And it's just was frightening what their playbook is after this election. They intend to win the election with Trump, and then they want to replace the federal employees with people of their choosing. They think that 95% of the federal employees are Democrats, and there's a high number of African Americans, so they want to replace them. And think about that. They're saying that those African Americans that work in federal jobs, they can't trust them, they want to replace them. You know, never mind the fact that our military is populated with a lot of African Americans. They go out there and fight and die for the country. But so this Juneteenth, I did a lot of reflection. There are so many things that we need to work on, but it starts, of course, with the right that we currently have. That is the right to vote, the right to serve on jury. And those are the things that I think that we have to be preaching, particularly this year, because democracy is at stake.
Absolutely, Attorney Lee. And also on Juneteenth, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson named his chief equity office and announced a $500,000 appropriation to study reparations in the city of Chicago. And he signed a executive order establishing a reparations task force to begin its work. And we know that work, Milton, similar work was commenced in California as well. And then Evanston, Illinois, has a reparations initiative as well, which I read recently. The city of Evanston has been sued, but the task force, and he started out with an apology, and attorneys Lee and Grimes, I always say that there can be, even in litigation and mediation and alternative dispute resolution, there's power many times in an apology. And so he apologized to African Americans in Chicago, and they are working to devise solutions to make Chicago more diverse and inclusive. And they're looking, there is a 27 point racial equity action plan for Chicago city departments, but the goal of this task force is to examine the systemically, historically racist institutions in Chicago that have resulted in disinvestment in African American communities and begin efforts to make that right. So it's a great first step by Mayor Johnson, and we'll look forward to the developments in that work.
Yeah, that apology in the book by, I think her name is Hams or Hands. It's titled By Hands We Now Know, and it talks about the incidents of murder, brutality, and lynching back during the Jim Crow period, and in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. And Brian Stevens has a great memorial to about 5,000 African Americans, women and children and men who were hung and brutalized and murdered, and the perpetrator just walk away in broad daylight. And so the first thing to do when you're seeking reparations is get the apology from the perpetrator. And once you get that acknowledgement through the apology, then you can talk about the reparations. And there's been many wrongs that have been identified. Perpetrator hadn't admitted they were wrong and has not apologized. So it's a big step to sit down at the table with those who committed those deeds or their descendants of those who committed those deeds, and acknowledge that a wrong has been done and apologize for it. And then you can start your course towards reparation. It's a great book on that.
Hey, Attorney Banks and Grime, I remember also when I reflected about Juneteenth, I remember many years ago I heard about the Negro Motors Green Book that was initially published in 1937. And that was instructive because it showed the Blacks at that time where they could eat or where they could stay in America. It was an amazing type thing that the African Americans were able to organize right away because of systemic racism. They couldn't stay in a hotel. Reggie Jackson, famous baseball player, Hall of Famer, probably said it best on TV this week. And I think that we forget about that. And so when you talk about reparation and things like that, everybody forget that the way the country was formed, the government gave European American land and they were able to get capital. That's how they got started. So everything that helped African America achieve success, they've been solely been taken apart, like affirmative action. Affirmative action has always been used in America, but it was not for African America until the 70s. Where I went to law school, affirmative action meant that if you were politically connected, white, and had money, you got into most prestigious law school or graduate type programs, right? Then in the late 70s, they included African American. Now it's almost a sin, and everybody think affirmative action is bad. But it only applied to African American, what, in the last 50 or 60 years? And so I did all this reflection on Juneteenth, and I just thought that it was a great day that we recognized. And one of the few times that I spent a lot of time thinking about these things. As we move forward, it tells you the things that we have to fight for equal justice and rights and things like that. But it also gave us a foundation as to what our ancestors did to overcome systemic racism and racial prejudice. The same problem that we had in the 60s and the 50s and back then, we still have today. Milton, as you know, we still have an abnormally high shooting, for example, African American by police officers.
Yeah.
Although their life doesn't mean anything.
I'd like to touch on something you said, and you reminded me of when you talked about Reggie Jackson. In this book titled Heritage, and I forgot the author's name, I read it some years ago, but it's about athletes and how they survive. I didn't see it mentioned this week when the Negro League was portrayed as coming up, and they're using their statistics now in ball and recognizing their hitting and batting and pitching and statistics in Negro League baseball, and recognizing you have some awesome stars of that sport in the Negro League. But in this book, Heritage, they bring out that Jackie Robinson and them and some of the old guys, they would pass along, it goes along with the Green Book, they would pass along to each other. Like when a Southern team came to California, Black players on they in that league, they would give information, they would pass along where you can stay, where you can go eat, and where you won't be bothered. And you could live with a competitive player. You follow me? They looked out for each other. And that brotherhood, that bonding, man, for our people, it reminded me of when I went to elementary and high school. I went to all-Black school, elementary school in North Carolina, Black high school in Northern Virginia, in Fairfax County, a Black university, West Virginia State University. All the whites at that time had integrated it when I went in 1963. But there's a certain nurturing and bounding and brotherhood, even though it was necessitated because society was prejudiced towards us. But I hate to say it, seems like we've lost some of that today, that bonding that helped us fight to gain these civil rights. Young people are spread all over there and on the internet and don't seem to have that cohesiveness that we had when you and I, and Vanita not going to, she didn't experience this. She's too young for this. She was a little girl. She saw it. She heard her parents talk about it. You know, that was a beautiful time, y'all. Even though it was a lot of pain in it, that was a beautiful time. And now that I look back over that time, yeah, we did a lot. Why are you smiling, Nate?
Well, she went to Indianapolis Shortridge, and she's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's good.
You know, so that tells me that when she went to Shortridge, it was desegregated because we used to have the African American high school was Christmas attics here in the city. Maybe she could explain that to me because I don't remember the history of Shortridge. I just know about attics.
Well, I grew up in a very special moment in time. And in my remarks at Shortridge during the Hall of Fame ceremony, I reflected that during my time at Shortridge, we were a model of diversity and inclusion before the terms were even coined. Shortridge was an academic high school. You had to take a test to get in. It was very, very diverse at the time, and that later eroded, right? And then after my remarks, some earlier African-American students approached me and shared that when they were at Shortridge earlier, that was not their experience, but there was a special moment in time when Shortridge was one of the best and top high schools in the United States. It had a daily newspaper, student-run newspaper, a fencing team, and Kurt Vonnegut, one of many iconic graduates, the author, one of many graduates of Shortridge, stated that he wished everyone could have a public high school education, just like his high school education at Shortridge. And so I reflected on Mary Alice Rand, who was the first African-American student to attend Shortridge. And when she arrived, she was met by Abraham Shortridge, who was the then superintendent of schools, and Shortridge is named for him. And she stepped in to history when she arrived on that first day, matriculating into Shortridge. It was a very progressive school at that time, one of the first high schools, public high schools, that admitted women, that hired women as teachers, as well as African Americans as teachers as well. And so it was really great to be back at Shortridge, just to reflect on that history at that time. Shortridge was a model for diversity, equity, and inclusion, again, long before those words were ever coined in existence. And we had a diverse student body, diverse teachers, and great experience, Attorney Lee and Grimes. And again, you know, the school ultimately closed in 1981, was reopened as a middle school for many years, then reopened as a public policy high school. And now Shortridge is the only school in the state that offers a international degree. And so the school has been very resilient.
That's really historical. I attended a college called Florida College, or Florida Christian College, and back in 1973. Milton, Vanita, we were the first, Jackie May and I was the first African American ever to attend that college. It was a Christian university, and we attended college on basketball scholarships, which was a blessing because they were probably at the time the worst basketball team in the state of Florida, junior college. And we came from probably the best high school basketball team in the state, or one of the best. And we went to Florida College, and it was a unique experience because it was a Christian university. And when we arrived on campus, we had immediate success in basketball. So we became sort of very popular on campus. And it was a positive experience, although the school had been segregated. I was thinking about that. We ran into a few problems while we were there, but not from the university per se. But I remember when we used to walk to the gym across the bridge, the passerby, it was kind of bizarre at the time, that they would stick their butt out a window, take their pants off, and flash us. It was the weirdest thing. I mean, I'd never seen that before. I'm thinking, what on earth are they doing? I mean,
Giving you support.
yeah, it was just a weird thing. But I discovered that they weren't just flashing the black athlete, they were also flashing the white students. And it was a matter of the fact that I guess they were Christianity, and Florida College was a unique college at the time. You couldn't have, we can go to the beach and see women in bathing suit, and women on campus had to wear long dresses. So it was a unique experience. But the one thing that was important about it is that we ended segregation at that college. And so it ended up being a positive experience because that was important.
Where was this?
Tampa, Florida.
Okay, you
Tampa
couldn't go
on the east side on 56th Street. There's a entertainment place called Busch Garden. So the college is about, I don't know, 3-4 miles on Busch Garden going east on 56th Street.
And you couldn't go to the beach. You couldn't go to the beach. I hate to interrupt you, but I'll forget if I don't. You couldn't go to the beach and see women in bathing suit. You said that. If that was a specific statement by the government or the authorities at the time, didn't want you to see women in bathing suit.
No
white
less
women.
bathing. We had a demerit system at Florida College. If you got 25 demerits, you got kicked out of the college, right? And you get a demerit, like every day you have to clean up your room in your dorm. You have to make up your bed and you have to fold your clothes. If you didn't do that, you get one demerit. And then every day you have to attend chapel. And if you didn't attend chapel, you get a demerit.
They didn't have the inkwell system there where, like, we sued the city of Santa Monica, and looking back in the history of the city, found that at a time, and it existed all around the country, certain cities that had beach property and beaches, like Santa Monica, has 5 miles of beach, but only one specific block from 60th Street to 61st Street. It was called the Inkwell, and that's where Black people could come and sit on the beach and lay on the beach, but they couldn't go past those boundaries. For 5 miles of beach, it was one little block that Blacks and Browns had to go to. That was their restricted zone for the beach. Just the history of this country and these cities, and the racism and the discrimination and the housing laws and stuff that made race, that supported racism and separation and discrimination. It's just awesome that we're still here. Really.
And so what happened is, I think that's where I got urged to be a lawyer, because while at Florida College, I negotiated with the dean and the president certain rights for students. One of the things I negotiated was that we could wear jeans on Friday. And
so
then
so Attorney Lee, you're the father of jeans on Friday?
Well, yeah.
No,
and then
he's the father of going to the beach on Fridays.
Well, you're like this one. I also negotiated for women to wear pants on Friday at Florida College. Ooh. See, our cheerleaders didn't wear cheerleader dresses. They had to wear long pants at Florida College. And so, we had some very restricted rules. And, you had to go to chapel every day. It was just different in the sense that I grew up in the church, so it wasn't a radical thing, but they trained ministers. And even here in our city, there are multiple ministers that attended this college because they really were very well prepared, because they had a rigorous academic curriculum for ministers. So it's just so happened that we played basketball, and we became one of the best basketball programs in the state and the country for junior college. My second year there, we won a national championship in basketball because we were really good. And so the net result was that it was a positive experience because the college was behind us and stuff. And we were able to bring in more African American to the college. And while I was there, so Jack and Manny and I were the first two. By the time we left, I think it was 6 of us. So we had, was that 100% increase, Milton?
I guess so. They didn't have the rule. What year was this?
1973 to 75.
Okay. You remember the movie Glory Road that was made about the Texas Western College that played the all-black team in the NCAA championship, and it was the first time in history an all-black team played. The rule was you couldn't play more than 2 or 3 black players in the Division I basketball program. That was the segregation policy. You could play 3 of them at home, but you could only play 2 on the road. And that was the first team that played an all-black team and won the state national championship. Beautiful movie.
They beat Kentucky and
Yeah, beat Kentucky. And Pat Riley, was it Pat Riley?
yes.
Played with Kentucky back then? Yeah, with an all-black team. First time.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. That was
okay.
That was a famous thing in American history because I was particularly interested in that because at the time, everybody forget about the fact that when we were in school, even when I went to Moorhead and I played basketball at Moorhead, the coach there would not play the best players.
Right.
I was on the second team, and every day in practice, the second team, we went against them. We kicked their butt every day. Never once they beat us. I remember we were playing a game. This is very important in North Carolina, Charlotte. They were one of the top 5 teams in the country. They were headed down about 16 at halftime, and then 16 minutes to go in the game, they were up like 24 points. He took out the starting 5, put in the second team, which was all black players. With 4 minutes to go, we were up by 8 points. We put a press on them, and we were kicking their butt, and he took the all black players out and inserted the first team, which was, I think, 3 whites and 2 blacks. And they came back and beat us towards the end. But instead of trying to win the game, he wanted to only win it with certain players. It was just shocking and led to the size of the team.
Right.
Now, today, with NIL money, stuff like that, it's a little bit different because players are being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to participate in basketball. But reflecting on that, it tells you how far we've come in terms of progress in America, but we still got a lot of steps to go forward.
Okay. Well, interesting pass, y'all. Interesting.
Now, Pierre sent in a really good question for Vanita. He said, how do we get close to reparation if young blacks aren't voting? That's a tough question, Vanita.
Yes, he's saying we'd get close to reparation, but young blacks aren't voting. And I'm looking at an article that was published yesterday. And it's quite alarming. And it's focused on Wisconsin, which, as you know, is an important swing state. And the article, Black voters in the city could determine 2024, and is not looking good for Biden. And so, but few cities have received the kind of care and attention that the current Biden administration has placed on Wisconsin, or it's placed on Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The president has traveled regularly there, as well as our vice president, and millions of dollars have been directed to Milwaukee, Wisconsin's largest cities. But the problem is that Milwaukee isn't returning the affection, and could really be a big problem, at least today, in terms of the polls, suggest that President Biden is trailing behind his performance in 2020 in both the city of Milwaukee and the surrounding county. And so there's a big reason for that, and that's the Black voters in Milwaukee. They are very influential voting bloc, and they can determine if the state turns blue or whether it's going to flip this fall. And so some voters have serious doubts about the administration and whether the administration has delivered on its promises to African-American communities. And so the question is whether African-American voters are going to turn out in this critical swing state in November. It's been historically Democratic, and Milwaukee requires a lot of specific focus and attention.
Yeah, just flashed that the Republicans are angry or mad and motivated. What did he mean by that?
I have no idea. I think that they're upset. Donald Trump has been a one-man wrecking crew. First, he get a civil punishment for being a fraudster and his business dealer, and they take his business license to do business in New York. Then a woman, say, sexual assault her in an apartment store. You get a multi-million-dollar, about a $90 million verdict for damages, and the judge determined that he had actually raped the woman in a department store. It's just, then you get 34 felony conviction, and the 34 felony conviction, of course, had to do with the fact the same charges he filed against Michael Cohen, his lawyer, went to prison for that. And they said that, oh, these are fabricated charges. They ignored the fact that that's why he sent his lawyer to prison, in part.
Right.
And so I watch in horror on TV how people rewrite narratives. And that's one of the problems we're dealing with. There's so much misinformation that is in our airways. And I watched this one guy, Byron Donaldson from Florida. He said, Biden is the worst president in history. Now, what's the difference between Biden and Trump? Well, under Trump, Black unemployment rose to 9.33%. Under Trump, we had a greater disparity in wealth division under Trump. Under Trump, we had the highest number of African American ever in the history be killed by a pandemic. And under Biden, we have infrastructure, we have jobs, low unemployment, we take care of medical needs. And so when we add it all up, they just repeat a lie after lie after lie. And apparently, because they keep repeating lies, people believe it. It's just insane to me.
Well, it seems like Pierre has cleared himself, with me at least, in that the Republicans are motivated and angry to vote so that they can change the way things are. And that's why we need to get out and vote and motivate our people to come out and vote. We may be going back in history with all of the accomplishments that have been made through the administrations before. So.
Well, as Attorney Banks pointed out once before, we've had some significant setbacks in the last year. We've lost affirmative action, diversity and inclusion. They take away the rights to loan money to African American women business. This is insane. We're going to reverse now, right before our eyes.
What you gonna do? What we gonna do? Ms. Banks, what are we gonna do?
Well, we have to, and we've talked about it many, many times, the messaging, the framing of the narrative. We have to ensure that the messaging gets down to our grassroots communities, many of which are stating that they don't see how all the efforts and accomplishments of the current administration has made a difference in their daily lives. And when I hear that, I think, okay, doesn't anyone have a relative who now their insulin medication is capped at $35? Does anyone know a student who's had their college debt wiped out? Has anyone benefited from jobs as a result of the infrastructure?
Vanita, what you're pointing out,
Initiatives?
excuse me, what you're pointing out is what we talked about last year, and that is somebody in this administration needs to do some PR, harder PR, or something, because all that you just pointed out is not that well known. I don't know.
Okay, let's take a call. Call, you have a question or comment for legal issues today. Hello?
Hello.
Yes,
This is
what's
Guy
your
calling
question or
now.
comment, sir?
Yeah, it's interesting how the facility that's being hit. In fact, President 5
Break it up. I can't understand what he's
New
saying.
York.
Yeah, you're breaking up. We have a bad connection, caller. I didn't hear what you said.
Can you hear me better now?
Are you
We
on a
use-
mic or something or what?
Can you? No, I'm on a regular phone, but
It's
just a
better.
minute.
It's better now. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I think it's interesting how things are being pitched in terms of former president number 45 when he was convicted by a jury of his peers in New York, and folks are intimating that he couldn't get a fair trial in New York. But at the same time, not much is being said about the fact that he has appointed 3 jurors to the Supreme Court, and they're saying that even though the Supreme Court is supposed to be unbiased, that there's some bias that's being shown in some of the rulings. I just think it's interesting how, on one hand, folks are kind of looking at the fact that he was convicted in New York, which is primarily a Democrat city, supposedly. And at the same time, they don't look at the fact that there was obvious political dealings in terms of his appointments to the Supreme Court. What do you think about that?
Vanita, Milton?
I'm not quite sure what comparison he's asking for.
Well, let me try to make it a little bit more clear. He was ingenious in terms of framing all of his actions in a political manner, Democrat versus Republican, from the very beginning of his impeachment trials and et cetera. He puts it in a framework of Democrat versus Republican, or Republican versus Democrat. And he's able to use that to his advantage. So I'm just wondering, the fact that his conviction is put into that framework is pretty interesting, and the fact that he has gotten away. In other words, if Al Capone had used the same technique, he might have gotten away scot-free also. Does that make more sense?
Well,
I say that you just have to read Project 2025, and that everyone in the African American community should have access to that document, because it tells you exactly what the plans are if former President 45 is ultimately
working at a group home or something?
elected. For example, as Attorney Lee stated, there is the plan to terminate all career government employees and replace those individuals with loyalists, for example. And so we need to take that Project 2025, it's their playbook, and we need to distill it down to very clear and concise messaging as we are moving toward the November election. And we have to also realize that this playbook that's being used is not new, and I think it may be addressing some of Guy's points that he was making in terms of what do you do, you know, when you're trying to perpetuate this type of authoritarian regime. You, because political parties have been the guardrails against this type of extremist politician actually winning high public office. There was a time when the political parties, they were the guardrails that controlled against this type of emergence of an extreme candidate like the former president. But when you demonize the other side and you say that they're not human because they disagree with you and therefore they need to be jailed, when you stack the courts, which is such a travesty what we're looking at today, when you encourage violence, and when you attack the rule of law and our justice system in the United States, and keep in mind, this is not a new playbook, but it's the playbook that is being instituted. And it's all laid out in Project 2025. And so it's very important that, you know, what would you prefer? Another 4 years under, well, I worry about another 4 years under the former president who's telling you that he's not operating in the best interest of the people, or the Biden administration. It's a very important choice.
We'll take one quick caller because we only got a few minutes left. Okay, Pierre, you have a comment. Let me mute you. Pierre, you have. Pierre, you got a question coming for us real quickly.
You can hear me?
Yeah, turn your radio down.
I just wanted to. That's okay. I'll call back next week.
I lost him. Okay, we lost him when he changed. But in any event, I like to any closing comments before we leave the air today, counselors.
I think Vanita pointed out very well that, hate to use the term dangerous times, but I was talking with a friend a couple of days ago about it's just a feeling, and it's just and that's what life is based on, feelings, that we're in are we in a scary time? We're in a serious time that we can't be comfortable with what is. The old values that we've established and gotten used to seem to be threatened. It's coming down like Pompeii. I guess we are in scary times right now. This man has turned this thing upside down, and nobody's comfortable with what's going to end up. If he loses the election, then they're going to attack the results, and the threat is anything could come out of that. If he wins the election, he's going to redo this whole makeup. So it's scary. You can't win.
I agree, Attorney Grimes. It is a very dangerous time. And I am recommending, and I'm going to send to you, colleagues, this article, Black Voters, and it's about the citizenry in Milwaukee. This article entitled Black Voters in This City Could Determine 2024, and it's not looking good for Biden. And so this article very, very clearly articulates the challenge that that we're facing in terms of the Black electorate in Milwaukee and surrounding counties. And it's the very, very issue that we're going to have to address every single day and minute from now until the election to turn the sentiments that are expressed in this article around, because it is fraught with examples of Black American citizens in Milwaukee that are saying things like, there's so many manufacturing jobs that got shipped to Mexico for cheaper prices, and now we're sending and are now sending their parts back here. Sentiments that there's still disproportionate, as you mentioned, gun violence against African American men in their communities in Milwaukee. Factories have shut down, leaving abandoned lots, all over Milwaukee. And from concerns about how the Palestinian-Israeli situation is being addressed. And so we really have a lot of work to do. And again, I'm looking at the article where there's a messaging problem. One of the activists in Milwaukee is saying there's a messaging problem. And we've been saying there's a messaging problem, right? For a long time.
Yep.
Well, thank you, everyone. And we'll continue this conversation next Saturday. Until then, may God bless and keep everyone. Stay healthy and be careful you out there. If you're walking in the streets and stuff, remember, hot weather, people driving faster and crazier. So be careful, everyone. Take care, everyone. Have a blessed day.
God bless.